when you can come away from the hype cycle.
And maybe a little bit, wrongly inspired by Hollywood movies about the robots are taking over with AI.
Your business, it might have been okay the next year, but in 10 years, you probably adapted or you were out of business.
What would you advise these people and the leadership of these, mid-sized companies?
Activities that came out with DeepSeek and things of that nature.
Yeah. But the AI agent, it's almost like a third-class parallel universe. Welcome to AI Unplugged Without Borders, the video podcast series from the Transatlantic AI Exchange, where we bring you unfiltered conversations with the leaders shaping the future of AI. Today's episode, the Boardroom AI, the C-suite voices on the future, dives into how AI is being discussed, deployed, and scaled at the highest levels of corporate leadership. I'm honored to be joined by a longtime friend and one of Silicon Valley's most respected financial leaders, Mark Hawkins, a trusted voice in the boardroom of some of the world's most innovative innovation companies. Mark Hawkins is a seasoned financial executive with 35 plus years of experience at leading tech companies, most notably Salesforce, where he served as president and CFO from 2014 till 2021. During his tenure, Salesforce market cap grew from 33 billion to over 296 billion, joining both the Fortune 500 and the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Hawkins was named President and CFO Emeritus in 2021. He currently serves on the boards of Workday as an audit chair, Cloudflare as an audit chair, and Toast as a chairman of the board. He's also a venture partner at the very famous established NEA venture firm and advisor to several private companies. Mark is a founding member of the A4S.org CFO Leadership Network in the USA, and previously served on the NICE listed company advisory board from 2019 to 2022. I'm your host, Thomas Neubert, born and raised in Germany, a longtime entrepreneur and corporate executive living here in Silicon Valley for over 34 years, and founder of the Transatlantic AI Exchange. So let's get to it. Mark, thank you very much for taking your precious time and joining our AI Unplugged Without Border video series. And it took a long time to get you in our show, and I greatly appreciate that. I know you are super busy. You are travel around the world. You are a very, very seasoned executive, and I couldn't wait to interview you because for all these years that we know each other, you always have the best wisdom, the predictions, a macro view as well as a micro view. And you have been very active on board level, particularly corporate board levels, C-suite level conversations and interactions. And you have become over time an expert in artificial intelligence from your particular point of view. So welcome to the show.
Well, Thomas, thank you. It's an honor to be here. It's great to see all the dialogue you're creating on a topic that is one of the most important topics in the world and will be one of the most important topics in all of our lifetime, which is AI.
I absolutely agree with you. So over the last year and a half or so, we have had startup entrepreneurs, we had the United Nations, and in our podcast, yours is very different, but extremely valuable at the same time because you have a bird's eye view from board level and C-suites. How do they have to prepare, act, implement, finance, every aspect of the artificial intelligence wave? So we prepared a few questions, and I hope for the listeners, this is going to be a super interesting, valuable exchange of information. So with that in mind, I would like to opening up with one of the first question, and that is how to justify an AI investment with the board and the C-suites.
Well, it's so important because in this world where everyone, intuitively understands that this is truly one of those step function technologies that are going to change society and change the world. It's so important to be credible when you go in to make investments because a lot of people have been through a lot of different waves of technology and, various competing interests for investment. And one of the things you find are sometimes people are trying to invest in what I call the hype cycle. And the hype cycle is when people begin to intuitively understand something's really important and big and changing, but you can't get a clear use case where a problem is being solved and how to fix something and how to make things more productive or how to make things faster or how to make things better. And when you can come away from the hype cycle and directly into the use cycle, to me, that's when things get very, very investable. And I think you're seeing the pragmatic application of AI right now, and it's just the beginning of the beginning. But I think it's incredibly powerful. But what that means to me, and one of the ways that again warrants people to make capital allocation decisions to invest in AI, is when somebody can come to the board or come to the leadership team first and really talk about, here's the problem being solved. Here's the metrics that we're going to track in terms of seeing how we've made a return on this investment.
Yeah.
Here are the expected benefits in a very as quantitative manner as possible, although albeit some might be qualitative as well. And just not shy away from it, Thomas. Get really practical, just like you would do any kind of use case for things that are more established technology or investment opportunities, and have a very pragmatic discussion with the board. I think when somebody says, that, they want to do something with no metrics, with no deeply well thought out business case, it just makes it harder for a leadership team or a board to take their precious finite capital and allocate it to something. So my big message to people is be practical, be rigorous, be analytical, and really be clear on the problem that's being solved. And I think in those cases, it's going to warrant real capital allocation, and
Yeah.
I think it's good for people.
I recall that we discussed AI a little bit even before the magical chat GPT moment, which is roughly like 2 years ago, 2+ years ago. But you mentioned that shortly after, and I forgot the correct number, but you mentioned that there was almost like 300 or something plus publicly traded companies where the CEO and the CFO had already then mentioned and referred to AI in their earning calls. And looking at technical trends, which normally, takes a while, takes a few years, but this has happened so fast that it's a kind of a reflection how important AI in general is for not just the human beings using ChatGPT and others LLMs, but also for the corporate world. So before I go into the next question, maybe a side question. Based on your own experience and the insights over the last few years, are there specific executional things that stuck out, that got your attention, that the boards did right? And maybe are a few things to suggest from a learning perspective, some blunders that you would like to see that would have been done differently?
Well, let me just kind of opine on kind of the broader part, which is, how do we be better with AI? And how do we constantly be better? I like to say better, better, never done. Even if you're best, you're not done. It's all about leaning to the future. And so the way I think about this is for a C-suite or a board to manage AI correctly, there's one thing that's very clear to me. They need to read every day. They need to experiment every day. They need to immerse themselves in the technology. And I'm not talking about somebody you don't need to have a chief technology officer, for every board seat or every C-suite level. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that this is going to touch every function, every division, every organization, I believe in some form or fashion over time. So the most important thing for C-suites to get it right and better, and for boards to get it right and better, is to lean into learning about it. I encourage people, Thomas, really practical steps. Have you downloaded your favorite, AI on your phone? Is it Perplexity? Is it is a Gemini, is a ChatGPT, whatever, whatever it is. There's a lot of really, good offerings out there. But one has to begin that journey and start to engage in lots and lots of different ways. Are people experimenting with Notebook LM, where you can take 10 reports, put it in there, and in 10 minutes have a 15-minute podcast for yourself to
Yes.
summarize? And for all the good and bad that has, all the pros and cons and the state of maturity, are we doing that? Do people have a framework for how to understand how AI is being applied in a corporation? And what I mean by that, Thomas, is you wouldn't apply normal IT technology without normal controls and framework. You don't do that.
Yeah.
You have to run a company reliably, robustly. So there's no exception with AI. Think about AI like you're managing software. How do you have version control? How do you have, um, you know, release to production controls? How do you have all the different things that one needs to have? And so I think if you're talking about very pragmatically at the C-suite level, at the board level, deep, continuous, intensely focused learning for every single member of these various bodies, practical application and experimentation, making sure there's frameworks and controls around them. And at the same time, let the innovative spirit just run hard and run fast. So it's not about slowing it down. It's about controlling it like you would do, any other technology. This is just much more explosive and much faster than anything we've ever seen. So those are a few things I would think about if you want to elevate to what a board should do or a C-suite should do. These are just my practical suggestions. I welcome yours and other fields, but those are a few.
No, I like it. And knowing your background as a CFO and a, seasoned board member, what's impressive for me is you learn by doing and you continuously learn. And I'm a huge fan of lifelong learning as well. So I think I get the message, and thank you for that. Maybe let's discuss a little bit about the agentic versus the generative AI waves. How do you view that, and how does board member, C-level people see this whole wave, and what can you do with it?
Well, I think, again, this is an amazing wave right when people are starting to really begin to think about generative AI, and the content, aspects of that are just utterly remarkable. And people can go through and begin to experiment in taking, something and turning it into a poem and then turning it into kanji, so that's in Japanese, and then make it Shakespearean and to all do that in 20 seconds and have something really interesting, or to help create a speech, or, all the different things that generative AI can do, and the kind of processing of content, which is just simply remarkable. And there's endless use cases where we can get productivity and betterment if we do this right. Generative by AI.
Yes.
That, and we start to think about agentic. Well, agentic to me is so remarkable because embodied in it, agentic is agent. And the agent is doing more than processing content. There's reasoning happening, Thomas. Literally reasoning. And if it stopped at that, that would be interesting. But it doesn't stop at that. It can go from reasoning into then go do an action. So you can now go from processing all the world's knowledge that's available in these, large LMS, uh, large language models. You can do it in whatever source of data that you have. But what's powerful is to go beyond that and start taking actions and creating agents. And so that is something I'm not sure everybody's really grokked. But today, if you think about an employee, you want to you track employees. You you see how they perform, you develop them, and so on and so forth. And we get that paradigm. But now when we talk about a digital employee, you have to step back and ask yourself, wait a minute, what does that actually mean? Is it an employee who's digitally educated, a human being? Or is it a digital employee is an agent that works 24 by 7 by 365 with no vacation at microprocessor speed, nanoseconds, picoseconds, whatever the case might be, and is actually doing work. And by the way, these agents also need to be tracked like an employee. And so, for example, at Workforce, which I'm on the board of, they announced the ability, because companies are asking for it and needing it, is the ability to manage your entire workforce population, your human employees and your agents. They all have different numbers. They all have you look at. This is real today.
That's crazy, huh?
And think about this, Thomas. Now agents have agents,
Yeah.
agent staffs. So it is so important in a world that's going quickly that one needs to understand how they're performing. What are the good digital employees that are doing really well and what are not as productive or effective, maybe is a good word. And you keep refining, but companies are going to need to manage those. And in the same way in software, you have to manage version control. People are going to have to manage agents in the agentic world. And so I think it's not hard to stretch your imagination to the notion that everybody can have agents working for them and agents of agents. And what does that mean? And it just creates an endless number of opportunities. But with that opportunity, as is true in all cases with powerful capabilities, one needs to manage it effectively. And so we're starting to see that. And, yeah, I mentioned that really cool, announcements that are out there and public. But it is quite remarkable what's happening. And this is the beginning of the beginning, Thomas. And again, this is where it's better, never done. Uh, any C-suite member or board member that's not leaning into trying to learn by the week is getting behind. I got one of my top books is a really interesting book that's coming right now called The Coming Wave. And this was listed by, the various authorities that I guess it's Bill Gates' favorite book in AI. All of us need to be reading stuff, whether it's that book or whoever's book, and getting different points of view to be able to be effective stewards, effective leaders, to bring real results and pragmatic results and measurable results and tangible results and also the ethical use of technology. One needs to be grounded in the ethical use of technology. And so that's why it's more important than ever that everybody at every level is leaning in to learn and contribute. But it's an incredibly exciting time. Innovation is the wellspring to productivity and wellness and uh, economic goodness for society, and we just need to really manage it
Yeah.
personally
Yeah,
and appropriately.
that is fascinating feedback from the high level point of view, how you see the world. It just so happened 2 weeks ago. I haven't posted it yet, but I went to a Microsoft event a few weeks ago here in Mountain View, and there was a presenter, a CEO of a startup company in San Francisco, and his company is focusing on building agent for others in a very cost-effective, easy-to-use way, like for a non-technical person. And I was very fascinated about the tool and the platform that they are building. I will be posting this in like 2 weeks probably. But that's on the in the engine room. What can be done to build AI agents who is not technical savvy and then just do something with it. Now,
Well, that if you think about agents, you literally need to have an agent's system of record. Think
yep,
about
yeah,
that, and that for people who understand the criticality of having a system of record,
yeah.
it's very clear that that's another point. But that's just one notion along the way that as we lean into this incredible journey.
I mean, it almost sounds like it's like a new class of citizenship. We have the humans who are working in the old-fashioned way and they're getting more modern and taking tools. Everybody now is talking and has always been talking, maybe a little bit, wrongly inspired by Hollywood movies about the robots are taking over with AI. But the AI agent, it's almost like a third class parallel universe of workforces in a digital form, digital software form that will interact with the humans and the robots. And in the future, you have these three elements that you need to have interacting with each other. But it also begs the question, how do you manage these interactions between humans and AI agents managing AI agents? I mean, this is even for me, it's a little bit scary, I have to say, if it's not being controlled properly.
Yeah, the thing that I would say that Thomas, I try to think of different paradigms, but one good paradigm is, what must have been like for our forefathers when electricity came to the scene. All of a sudden there's electricity and the ability to apply it, in a pervasive and ubiquitous way. And, if you were a business the day before electricity was available at a grid level, your business is probably okay the next day.
Yeah.
It might have been okay the next year, but in 10 years, you probably adopted or you were out of business. And so I think the famous saying that you can uh, overestimate what you can do in a year and underestimate what you can do in a decade. I think it's never been more true with AI, except for I'd probably shorten it to 5 years. I think there's, the ability for people to overstate what they think they can do in the next 12 months, but I think they could easily understate what's possible in 5 years. So electricity probably was scary, Thomas. You use that word. So, innovation, is a game changer. And so it's how do we lean into it? And with electricity, so much good can come from it, but you learn some rules to keep it safe, right? Same kind of benefit.
Yeah.
And if done well, it can scale and change people's lives and bring comfort and things to humanity. But if not managed, can create real problems and dangers. And so I think it's a good mental model to think about. The other thing I think about with AI, just in a pragmatic way, is sometimes, Thomas, we work on these paradigms, and we all have been through that in the years of history and before us as well, where we can imagine what we can imagine is capable of being done, just like prior electricity. Well, with AI, I think about people thinking about how to design a better car when AI allows you to think about how to fly. It's just a completely different set of capabilities that are more extensible than maybe even we're imagining right now. And there'll be issues that have to be worked through, like there have been with every major, stepping stone and progress in the history of humanity. But it's an exciting time, one to be very clear thinking, very pragmatic, very progressive in learning. And to keep a handle on it, not get lost in the hype, but just stay grounded in the pragmatism of what's in front of us.
Yeah. You work a lot with, Fortune 500 stock traded companies, so to speak, on a board level, but you also work with other groups and individuals, and you probably talk a lot and travel a lot. If I look at the big companies, I remember at the last Salesforce conference, there was like a few days before in the news, there was this, I think actually it was a slogan by Salesforce, we are the biggest AI company in the world. And the first time I read the headline, I was like, what are they smoking? Really? But then I saw a publicly available white paper that was written by the Salesforce Chief Innovation Officer about AI agents. And that document was like 3.5 years old. So he was one of the first, I guess, individuals who saw the future, who actually worked on it. And in the last conference that you guys had, or, Salesforce had, um, AI agent was all over. And all of the sudden, where in 2024 everything was large language models, 2025 is all about AI agents. So I give them the credit that they actually probably were right with what they are working on. But for me, the biggest takeaway is, if I use Salesforce as an example, and yes, there's, Microsoft and Google and some others, these are powerful, global established companies with a lot of budget for R&D, and they have the brightest people available to work on these things. Do you have any suggestions based on your point of view, what companies can do to not be lost behind or left behind, who are, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 companies who don't have all these bright people, who don't have all the visionary people to bring them into the forefront of AI agent and whatever comes next? What would you advise these people and the leadership of these, mid-sized companies?
First, I think you have referenced some just admirable companies, full stop. And, that's to be recognized. Some of which I'm very, been very fortunate to have worked with in the past, and, incredibly grateful for the chance to be part of that whole, experience and that journey, if you will. But I think if I, you know, abstract to your question about what do you do if you're not one of the, call them juggernauts of this big change, I think it's to remind oneself that great ideas come from everywhere. And, innovation is remarkable when there's constrained resources. You can see that with some of the latest, uh, activities that came out with DeepSeek and, things of that nature. Yeah. Constrained resources is not necessarily a bad thing because, necessity is the mother of invention. And so I think it's really important for founders and leaders to remember that, it's about innovation. It's about creativity. It's about application. It's about the North Star of solving real problems for real customers that can create magic, with any company. Do you need a certain level of scale for escape velocity? I think the answer to that is true. Yes. But on the other hand, great ideas, warrant, capital deployment. And, I always remind people that no matter what the economic environment is, if you have a magnificent idea, get it in front of people with capital. That's one of the beauties of the system that we live in and work in, where people will take risks and deploy capital on a brilliant idea that's a different idea. And even in the face of, gigantic competitors prosper. And I've had the good fortune to be part of some of those companies that have prospered in the face of gigantic competitors and done well, thanks to the leadership of, these various companies. So I wouldn't talk oneself into not leaning forward. I would just also understand that, we got to be even smarter and even more focused and even crisper, and the way you allocate your capital and the way you hunt for problems that need to be solved that one could uh, grow a business on, and as opposed to a science project. And um, again, I'm a firm believer that tightening resources sharpens the mind, sharpens the prioritization, and yeah, and then that was one of the, looking back, I think in the economy, kind of, when you have like 0% interest, it's not a great thing because it doesn't force the prioritization in the same way where a slightly higher interest rate, not a high interest rate, but a slightly higher interest rate allows society to allocate capital, on a risk basis, on a reward basis, and a little bit of I think a more effective manner. And so I think that's true with companies too. So constraints are not all bad is my bottom line.
Okay. So for a mid-sized company, I don't know, 500 employees to maybe a couple of thousands or something, or maybe 10,000, um, any advice for them to give for the leadership team? Should they go out and hire the big, Accentures in the world, or are they better off in defining internal working groups, in HR, in marketing, and supply chain, and manufacturing, and let them come to the leadership team with certain guidelines about where efficiency can be increased by developing AI? I mean, where do they start and how?
Yeah, I think, that I think I'm always struck by this comment about the understanding the difference between similar and identical. And what I mean by that is that, there's a lot of businesses that might have similar approaches of what you go do. And there's some that are slightly different. And that's very important to recognize. And so what I mean by that is that it's hard to do a generic, here's the playbook.
Yeah.
Because each of them are different, and you have to really, for me, the number one thing to do is to understand, listen, and absorb about what is a situation for that particular business. And once you have that baseline, then you kind of mark your, what I would call, tailored plan, and you look at the playbook of menu of things that you can draw on a specific situation. So I don't have like a generic thing. The thing I would say though is if you are, worried about having critical mass, look for alliances, look for strategic alliances, look for ways to leverage what you do and where you invest capital compared to where you leverage other people's capital. And, what is critical to be within your company and what is not critical to be in your company and that you leverage BPOs with or whatever the case might be. And to me, usually the most critical thing to protect the flow of capital forward is product innovation and go to market. And so everything else, you should try to get as much leverage as you can while making sure that you do the job well. Is something that I would say is pretty general. But in the case of AI, look for partnerships, look for ways to leverage, look for ways to be efficient, so that you can keep mainstream into innovation. That's the way I think about it.
I think maybe from my point of view, what I like to add is over the last 2+ years, I have seen many good content classes, online, offline, conferences that are very helpful, even for leadership people to get educated faster. I personally, without advertising or preferring one versus the other, MIT, Harvard, obviously Stanford, they have some amazing classes for leadership people, CXO people, board level people, to get educated on the bigger picture of AI, and then they're kind of breaking it down. So maybe that is something that a leader in a mid-sized company should consider. The good investment. And coming back to your lifelong learning is the most important thing for all of us to stay ahead of the waves of innovation.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And back to the education thing is so critical. The other thing I would think for a leader of any size company, not tailored to just a mid-size trying to, battle it out in a really critical area, is, this notion for leaders that, the term kitchen cabinet, everybody needs a kitchen cabinet, which was a historical reference to back in the FDR time period where, he had some people that he could go talk to and really sort through really, really critical issues. So I think, the parallel is that every C-suite should have, two or three peers that they really trust in their own kind of uh, confidence circle to be able to benchmark, what are you seeing? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? You try to create a neural network of what's actually happening in the space that you're in.
Yeah.
And because nobody, again, has a great ideas market corner. Nobody can absorb and synthesize everything that's happening. But if you have a few people that are in your inner circle that you can try to understand how the market's developing in an appropriate way, add that dialogue, it can be tremendously grounding and amazingly helpful.
Now, with your maybe personal prediction, if you have a glass ball, where do you see the biggest effect on AI in development technologies that is really affecting us in a very positive way within the next 12 months, 48 months, something like that?
Well, I think the efforts that's going in right now with AI and, healthcare is just utterly remarkable.
Yeah.
The only hesitation on that commentary of that time frame is, sometimes regulatory approvals and such of things that will be discovered and improved, sometimes takes a little time to get into play. But, some of the things that have already, been in play with AI is remarkable, including, like if you go in today, it's been operational for a long time, people go in to get an x-ray and you can have a person look at that initially, and then you can also scan it with AI. And if there's a delta in the conclusion, then it's escalated to a supervisor to try to understand why there are two different views of what's going on with that particular x-ray or MRI. And so, yeah, I'm not a healthcare expert for sure, but I really appreciate that this stuff is happening today. And so think about drug discovery, think about all the different things that could happen on a medical basis. I think it's going to be very additive to the medical system. And I do say additive. I think it's going to allow people to elevate, and yeah. And then on the business side, there's just no question, people are looking at this in terms of how to leverage your infrastructure better, your basic, company overhead better. How can you be more productive, more efficient? How do you answer customer requests? Customer support is an area of great interest. These are just the beginnings. Think about the internet when it first came out. People were trying to figure out, how do we make a business model and what do we do? And there was some ideas that were great that created, the kind of companies that you were talking about today. And there's some ideas that weren't so great and they kind of went their way. But um, I think you're going to see a huge stream of healthcare opportunities. I think you're going to see, I think before our very eyes, I feel like the economies are getting retooled to be more productive. And
Uh-huh. Yeah.
at a micro level, you know, Thomas, I like to use the metaphor. It's just not, um, you know, as expansive, but when Excel came, actually it was actually, uh, VisiCalc went to Lotus 123, went to
Lotus, yeah, I was just going to say Lotus one.
your Excel, but everyone said, "Oh my God, there's going to be like groups of people wiped out." It was completely not the case. Everybody elevated what they were doing, and there's not fewer people doing it now. And
Yeah. Yes.
so I think one needs to um, keep a balanced view on all these matters. But I do think it's going to get a chance to elevate productivity, elevate the work that people do, and elevate some of the solutions that are possible beyond what we currently have had the capability to deal with. Whether it's healthcare or in business. So I'm on the long term quite encouraged by this, but I'm also incredibly grounded in the challenges and the bumps along the way. And with any technology, even the dangers need to be managed as they have with every technological breakthrough since fire and bronze. And, where do we start? We just have to be thoughtful about it.
I would, in closing, I like, and I want to reemphasize what you said earlier in the conversation, the example with the electricity. I would say if there's two big takeaways out of this conversation, in my humbled opinion, one is lifelong learning is absolutely important and crucial for everybody, from not just the engineers writing code, but also from the C-level suite and board members to get familiar hands-on on tools that they can use to get a little bit more closer and acquainted with AI. But the biggest one is, you said earlier with the electricity, and I like to do the same with the internet, right? The ChatGPT moment for me was similar to the Mosaic Netscape browser moment, where it opened up the internet. And at that time, regular businesses could have gone further to another year, normal business, the second year, right? But who would have imagined, after there was the internet and the browser, that book companies or travel agencies would completely redefined? It didn't happen in 24 months. It happened in a couple of years, and the world has never been the same. So that should be an encouragement and a warning to some extent to people out there who are still hesitant to dive into the AI.
I think so. Let's just take the electricity thing, Thomas. Imagine a company that didn't embrace, they just said, on principle, they're not embracing that new paradigm. They don't understand it, so they're not embracing it. And then think about a family if they didn't embrace electricity and how different life would be, including even their ability to learn and be informed and whatever. Imagine a country that didn't embrace electricity would not be a modern, economically prosperous company today or country.
It's almost unbelievable. I mean, it's not, yeah, it's hard to see.
So the same fork in the road, the biggest danger that AI presents, full stop, is people ignoring it, because this will be at least as big a change, in my opinion, as electricity. So at a country level, at a company level, and at a family level. And the last thing, I'll put a pin in it, taking a different metaphor. Imagine, Thomas, 40 years ago, somebody said, I'm going to ignore digital. I'm going to ignore the phones. I'm not going to get computers for my kids. No one's going on the internet. I'm not doing e-commerce. I'm not doing any kind of getting my media. I'm not doing financial banking. I'm not doing online medical. I'm not like, imagine a person functioning in society today in the modern world that didn't just go down a fairly recent path of being digital.
Yeah,
As a vice citizen,
you're right.
that's a good path in terms of their economic prospects, their educational prospects, their health prospects, their standard living prospects. This is a bigger fork in the road that's even more important to lean into. So whether it's electricity or thinking about, the digital fork in the road, this is the AI fork in the road. And it has, like every fork in the road, the journey will be exciting. It'll be daunting. It'll be rewarding. It'll be challenging. It'll all the pluses and minuses that one needs to look at. But the most important thing is to commit that we're going to go figure out how to go down that road in a really good fashion. And that's the road to me that brings, the greatest level of opportunity, standard living, prosperity, security,
Yeah.
so that nature. So just a thought.
With that very strong message, I hope that we shook a few trees and made people think. I appreciate that. Mark, as always, nice talking to you. I appreciate the time. I hope our audience got some valuable information out of this. Hopefully, we motivated some people to just, take this very, very serious. And with that, I would like to close the session. Mark, as always, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. It's truly an honor, and I like to watch your sessions because I want to keep learning. Because I don't have all all the ideas sorted out either. We're all on a learning journey on this, and thanks for letting me just express one point of view and things that I've been thinking about. But it's an exciting time in tech.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Bye bye.